Welcome everyone to our event series From Data to Value. Tonight we're focusing on how to assess the value of data in a digital world. And this is actually our second hybrid event, co-hosted with the consultancy MM1 and the Stuttgart Connectory by Bosch. I'm very happy that we have many virtual guests and again, great speakers here in downtown Stuttgart in the Stuttgart Connectory. My name is Stefan Rück. I'm from Bosch, co-leading the Stuttgart Connectory, especially the outside-in innovation initiatives. For all of you joining virtually, I brought some pictures of the physical space, which is being used for various purposes. First of all, it's home to teams from Bosch working and collaborating in the space, but we also have a cozy lounge to conduct creative sessions or retreats with thought leaders. Finally, our auditorium, which you can see on the bottom right and where we are right now, basically for larger events or public meetups, for example, the AI Circle. Of course, major public events are limited these days, and Corona is, so to say, a bittersweet experience for us. On the one hand, we have less possibilities to meet in the space, which is, of course, part of the DNA to meet and to network of the Connectory. But on the other hand, we also have the opportunity to have virtual guests far away from Stuttgart. But the Connectory is much more than the space itself. Therefore, I also would like to compare the Connectory to a greenhouse. A greenhouse in where groups come together, civic partners, universities, startups, or companies with their resources, expertise, capabilities, with the aim basically to learn from each other and develop new business together. One example is our co-creation program, the Bosch Startup Harbor. It's a Berlin-based program that matches external startups with Bosch businesses, but also with other corporates that are partnering with us in this program. And they match the startups based on defined search fields provided to really solve specific challenges. For example, last week we had a side event when they concluded the third batch officially. Or if you want to stay in the picture, the situation tonight when we exchange can be compared to this little beehive and the bees that are flying around. And before I hand over to our co-host tonight, Laurens Kirchner, I would like to invite you to follow the Stuttgart Connectory on social media, here on LinkedIn, to stay informed on upcoming events and activities that take place here or virtually. The picture, of course, was taken before COVID hit, so tonight we sit much more relaxed here in the auditorium. Now, thanks again. And over to Laurens Kirchner from MM1.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody again from me and also from me. Thanks, Stefan, for hosting us. It's a great pleasure again to be here. The second time, actually, our series, I would say, of data to value events. Last time we had a good discussion, I think, very good discussion about data to value, about digital trust and related topics. And there was one question coming up very often, which centered around the white elephant in the room, it was called then, which is what is the value of data? And I think we're going to have a good discussion today about this specific topic with three great speakers. I'm introducing them in a minute. Before that, allow me for a little bit of advertising. I'm talking on behalf of MM1. I'm a managing partner at MM1. We are a Stuttgart-based consultancy, the consultancy for connected business, which means that we help our clients make use of the huge potential and the potential of digital growth through digital connectivity. This is what we do. We are a team of about 100 experts working on a lot of different services, and you see them here. Connectivity and IoT, digital products, data thinking, and digital transformation for a bunch of industries. My core topic, I'm sponsoring the data thinking practice within MM1, and this is why I'm very glad to be here today and to host this series of events together with the Stuttgart Connectory. We're glad to be here again. Who is going to talk about the value of data today from different perspectives? I'm very happy to have three really great speakers, I think, for this evening, starting off with Stefan Peetz from Schwarz IT, talking about intelligent data management to value, followed by Julian Storz from MongoDB, talking about breaking down data silos, so really how can we exchange data across organizations, I guess. And then rounding up by Marc Roberts, who's on the call, so joining us virtually from London, I understand, talking about really how does this exchange of data, especially specifically, I think, in the mobility work, so ecosystem exchange for data in mobility. So you will have a preview of our great speakers already in image. Here they are. And I would say without much further ado, handing over to Stefan. Very much looking forward to your talk about intelligent data management to value. Stefan.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. Thank you very much. Fortunately, I can let's say put this a little bit down for the moment. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me invited this evening for such an interesting topic. So I think I have to click. Should I read this as well? I guess some organizational stuff. I can do this for you. This is it's recorded. So. And as far as I read before, let's say since you joined this this virtual meeting, you let's say committed that this is okay, and hopefully all the participants online are muted, and you, I think it's good to listen and not to speak too much during our speeches. So if there are any questions for the participants, let's say online, just do it via chat. I think Stefan is, let's say, putting this to our audience as well, so we can answer your questions either during, let's say, the speech, but anyway, afterwards we will have this panel discussion as far as I'm informed there as well. So Lawrence already, let's say, introduced myself. I'm the managing director for enterprise data management at the Schwarz IT. Since our communication team, let's say, forced me to have there some official slides about Schwarz IT, let's say I will say some more words about this for sure. And data to value. This is a very tough question. Somebody on LinkedIn posted. There a lot of speeches have been done about this. A lot of let's say doctoral theses and books have been written. So there are a lot of ways, let's say, how to assess the value of data, and for sure there's no one and only truth about it. And we found on our journey of data management, we found there at least two examples which were quite well during the last years. And let's say I will, let's say, put me together with me in the journey of data management, what we did the last years. And at the end of the short speech, I will have there two examples. What this brought as a value. So that's simply the motivation. We are doing data management since several years right now. We are, let's say, active in some competence centers as well, and especially in this area of data management, you can only learn by each other. That's why, let's say, we said, of course, yes to this event this evening. Because having some peer work together on data management and on the ways which worked on the different ones could be a good thing. We established a framework for this. We call it IDA. It's Intelligent Data and Architecture. I will do some walkthrough together with you to this program. And at the end, I will have 2 examples on how we assess the value in some calculation patterns at the end. And of course, I can say something about the lessons we learned the last years about this. As I said before, I have to do some official advertisement, as you said, Lawrence, as well. So our communication department always says, yes, let's say, please do this. It's just a joke. The Schwarz IT, I think it's probably known as part of the Schwarz Group, and the 2 biggest parts of the Schwarz Group are the 2 retail branches. It's Lidl and Kaufland. I think I don't have to say too much about it. What most of the people do not know quite well is that we have 2 other big branches as well. The one is the Schwarz Production. And in this branch, let's say we are one of the biggest beverage producer in Europe. We are one of the biggest chocolate producer. We have one of the most modern production sites for ice cream. And of course, we are doing millions and millions of pieces of bakery every day for our stores worldwide. You see the figures here. I don't have to read them, set them down. And another, let's say, division which is growing very much is the green cycle, where we do a lot of circus and the recycling business worldwide here as well. So we have around about 12,000 stores and a lot of people with a lot of different processes. And then you can imagine trying to doing data management for all of these processes. It's a big journey which will never end at the end, and you can raise there a lot of questions about the value of data in the different processes. And this is one of this is the first example I want to give you at the end of this speech. Of course, the most value of data is raised in terms of gaining there some savings in processes, and this is the first way we calculated the last years how to, let's say, improve processes with good quality data. And of course, speaking about the Schwarz Group, there are a lot of more questions what the value of the data as an asset, and this is to be calculated completely differently. So this is the second example to tell you what we did here. So saying about something about the journey of data management, of course, if you have a green field, it's a good idea to somehow drill it down from a data strategy to, let's say, the data management projects or data management programs. So if you write it down from the left to the right, normally you would be recommended, probably Lawrence, your colleagues doing the same, saying, hey, if you want to do data management, it's a good idea to have a strategy for this. It's always what consultancies tell you. And you are right in this case, but normally you don't have a green field. What we did, we started with, let's do data management for the Lidl branch, for the purchasing department. And at the end, in the meanwhile, we defined a strategy for the whole group on the basis of this. So we started in the middle, and now we are working on the data strategy. And this data strategy now is written down into different programs at the end. And one of those programs is intelligent data and architecture, which we set up last year. And on the basis of this example, I will lead you through our data management journey, that you can have some understanding how we calculate the improvements in the processes and at the end the euros as a value of the data. What we understand in terms of data management is more or less the direction of data foundation. Talking about data management, it could be everything. It could be data and analytics and big data and some BI stuff. But what I'm talking about is more or less the kernel. We started with master data management some years ago and defined there some disciplines in master data management. And in the meanwhile, we are doing metadata management and master data management as some data foundation. And a colleague of mine, Holger Schell, is taking care about the whole analytics world and let's say how this is to be managed at the end. And what you see here in this circle is, let's say, our foundation of data management. It has in the kernel some data strategy. And this data strategy is not about, let's say, the data itself and the tooling at the end. As you can see, it's organization, methodology, processes, and the tooling, let's say, done in the disciplines of data quality management, classical master data management, metadata management, means the description of all our data and the classification and those stuff. Of course, doing data management in a big company needs some governance. I don't like the word at all, governance, because a lot of times is it used and often not in the in a positive way, but it can be positive. Data management has something to do with data architecture, and what we see in the last years is that probably data sharing and collaborative, let's say, approaches are a good idea for the future as well, because nobody will be able to gain the most effective value out of data if he tries to do it, or if a company tries to do it by themselves. So this is a big topic for us. And within the Schwarz group, we are not a startup. We have some, yes, but overall in the group, normally we have legacy. We have legacy systems, and harmonizing data at the end leads to some migration projects. That's why we defined that data migration is a discipline of our data management foundation as well. So this as some prerequisite, what I understand in terms of data management for the next slides. So more or less master and metadata management. So on this basis, last year we started a program which led at the end to a framework and to a platform itself, and this will be the next slide, more or less. What we did here is we said, okay, there is some need to make transparent what we have in our IT landscape, starting on the left hand side here. And this is what most of you know as a discipline of enterprise architecture management. Talking about data lineage at the end, and out of this, the data value, let's say you have to know your IT landscape on a system level, maybe started, and then coming, let's say, of the usage on system level to some data object level. And that's why we said, okay, we have to somehow address this with the project we called Enterprise Architecture Plan. So we established a real-time, let's say, plan and transparency of our IT landscape with some software and Linux basis. Let's say data management, of course, does not end at data object level. So thinking about the attribute level leads to the question, okay, if we want to have transparency in our data landscape, we have to think about a data catalog. And in combination with this enterprise architecture plan, we said, okay, we have to do a deep dive to the next level, to the data attribute level. That's why we established a project called Smart Data Catalog. And we did this at the end, as you can see, with the software from Ab initio. And some master data management methodology, let's say, has to be used, let's say, to set up all this transparency. So we said, okay, having data governance starts with some business capabilities and business rules, and we have to document this somewhere. And a good idea for us was to do this in combination with the Smart Data Catalog. So let's say doing the data governance documentation in the Smart Data Catalog on the basis of the master data management capabilities we have here. So this is done in the Smart Data Catalog as well. And the last thing, let's say we said, data management is nothing worth, and data is nothing worth if it has no good quality. So this is the fourth branch in this program. We said we have to take care in this end-to-end thinking that the data at the end has good quality. So we set up their data quality management platform on the basis of Informatica software. And this is more or less the framework EDA, Intelligent Data and Architecture. So we will go a little bit more in detail in a walkthrough how this looks like at the end and to explain. what enables us to calculate value of good data and processes at the end. So this walkthrough, let's say, contains in the first step of this, let's say, repository and reporting. So our business solutions, our business capabilities, our IT solutions and our applications are documented in an enterprise architecture plan, and the business glossary and the technical lineage and the data lineage is done in the smart data catalog. And we are having the possibilities doing some data profiling in a very, very simple way, having a first view on the quality of the data until, let's say, system, let's say, or until a data quality rule development over different systems on Informatica basis. And this is, let's say, more or less connected in this smart data catalog. You can go from data object level to data attribute level, and on the data attribute level to the quality rule at the end. And since you can imagine that this is somehow a little bit technically done, because you have to read the rules and rule IDs and all those from management perspective quite complex stuff. If you try to explain this, a managing partner, maybe you would understand that you sponsor data thinking, Lawrence, but some managers on board level, let's say, have big question marks if they are listening to those kind of explanations. So we said, okay, we have to make this transparent somehow on a management level. So we said we need their BI layer more or less to generate their dashboards for stakeholders on management level, where you can make things transparent. And on the other hand, of course, we have to make this transparent for the business, because they have to take care about the quality of their data. We are located in IT, of course, we have some data we are responsible for, but at the end, the business is responsible for their data because it's their processes at the end. So we defined there are a lot of the deliverables within those projects we did in the last 1.5 years, and I will not guide you through all of them because anyway you will have it as a handout, and if there are any questions I can answer afterwards. But just in this end-to-end walkthrough, let's say I want to outline that this is an interconnection between different disciplines, which leads at the end to an enablement to calculate value of data within processes, because it's a quite complex question how the data and which quality is used in which process. So what we did is, again, this repository to data lineage to data processes and life cycle, and this combined with some quality question at the end, this enables somehow to calculate, let's say, the value within the process. I have there some screenshots as well, just to have a quick, let's say, view on this, not to, let's say, completely crash the time. I can see the seconds running here, so you will have it in a handout. Just to come to the examples here of the data value evaluation. The first approach, as I said at the very beginning, of course, good quality of data can be calculated in improvement of processes, and we did this, for instance, on a project. It's called Master Data Management at Lidl, where we generated end-to-end master data synchronization from the purchasing department over the whole supply chain in the 30 Lidl countries, end-to-end for business partner and article master data, and we calculated the value of this process improvements with a special project done by a consultancy to have here, let's say, an objective audit from outside here, and the value of this process improvements we generated simply through this master data management is a value in euro over 100 million euro over 5 years, just by improvement of the data quality in the different processes. When I presented this figure the first time, and it's much more than the 100 million, I'm just not allowed to write it down in an external speech. When I presented this the first time in our board at Lidl side, they were laughing, because it's unbelievable what you can generate just with better quality data in the processes. And seeing this the first time, it looks like that you did there some mistake in your calculation. And it's easily possible, because if you, let's say, imagine, okay, just a simple attribute used in 12,000 stores every day, every single minute, of course, there's a scale effect you can generate there. Every second is worth a lot of money. And this is the first thing, and this is a way for us which works always. Let's say generating value through improvements of processes, through better quality of data. Every time it works, no doubt. Let's say whatever you do here, let's say you can calculate in euros. Of course, this often is a very complex thing to do, because you have to go for every single attribute through the whole process and who is doing what and so on. So this is a lot of time and a lot of effort to calculate the value. So what we thought about is how it looks like on a group level. If you think about an article like Nutella, it has 500 attributes. If you think about data used in such a big company like the Schwarz Group, it's a never-ending story. So we thought, okay, how to do this on a group level, and what's the value of the data we have in our systems as an asset. And this, of course, depends. And what we did here is we nevertheless, let's say, did this trial, how to do this. And of course, in theory, there are multiple methods to do this: cost-based, usage-based, market price-based, whatever. There, in theory, you can do a lot of things. And we defined that for us, at least, this cost-based analysis in combination with some data quality management approaches do work very well. So we defined there, let's say, some methodology with this, which, let's say, we have as a solution, more or less, and then we teamed up with the University of Münster with students, and 2 years ago we did their project seminar, and generating a standard methodology which accelerates this whole process of calculation. And to raise the time too much, this has a result. Let's say we defined there a standard for us, standard methodology. And this at the end leads to a toolbox you can use. And who is wondering, it's Excel based for the moment in a first fast approach, let's say, but it's usable and it works. And within some hours, let's say, you can calculate a first indication of every data you can think about with answering some simple question. So this is the second example, which of course delivers just an indication. But it's a way in terms of calculation of data as a value that you can easily do something without doing anything wrong, because even an indication is better than knowing nothing at the end. So hopefully, let's say, it's okay with the time still. So this was, let's say, our journey and our two examples, more or less. The lessons learned is, let's say, our hashtag we are using a lot of times. Machen ist wie wollen, nur krasser. It's anyway, it's better to just start with something than just talking about it and thinking about it and whatever. And what we learned is, even if you're doing something wrong and if it leads you to a wall where there's no further step in between, this is an experience you made. So, and then afterwards you can, let's say, do another way. And there are a lot of ways generating value and a lot of ways of data management. And that's more or less the summarization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan, very much.
I will hand over.
Thank you
again.
Thank you. Let's stay here maybe for another 2 or 3 minutes. I think you have the time. Because we wanted to, after each speech, and before I hand over to Julian, we wanted to have a chance for direct questions. In this case, to Stefan. Is there any question online already? Then I would have a question, which is, it totally goes back to what's our belief, which is back to your story that you told about showing this number of the cost savings, and then managing is cost savings, right?
Yeah,
cost savings to management. I mean, this is a little, I think, I expect the situation this was contrary to, let's say, the management intuition about and the myths maybe your management had about making use of data, which is typically AI and so on. So, how was the situation, and how did you make it credible and plausible?
Yeah, the situation was quite easy. When you want to have money for big projects, you have to present the case on board level. And we did not just one project, we did a whole program for this setting up master data management, and I had to present the content on the board level, and I presented there some nice dashboards and so on. And a colleague in the board, it was Werner Evertsman, asked me, Stefan, yeah, well, these are nice things you show, but what's this about? And then you can show this. You were responsible for Sweden as a country in former times, and this is the value for Sweden. And of course, then okay, and these are really the savings. Yes, they are, because we calculated it in detail. And this was the situation, and this is exactly what was unbelievable, that with such unsexy master data management, you can generate such a result at the end.
I think it's very impressive. Yeah. Very impressive. Yeah.
Okay.
Super. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very much.
Handing over. Julian. I leave this here for you to use.
Absolutely.
You should be able to click.
I should be able to click. I think that's still for you. Mission Schwarz IT. So this is me. So yeah, thank you very much for having me here. I'm going to talk today a little bit about data democratization and how to break down data silos. So in general, my talk will be a little bit more practical, a little bit more data oriented. So how we can actually make use of data, how we can actually leverage data for generating business value as well. We'll find some points where we're overlapping. I think I'll go into some other directions during the talk, but this will be the story in general. So data democratization. I really want to start my talk with taking a look into the rearview mirror, because when we're looking at where everything has begun, specifically also in an industry like retail and shopping, things have looked quite differently 60, 70 years ago, where we first had to switch from going from small owner-run stores, where you literally knew all of your customers yourself. You were able to talk to them, you knew their birth dates, you knew their preferences, everything was simple. And then we started to scale up. We started to industrialize more and more things also in this world. And today, with supermarkets, everything looks different. But obviously, as you know, we are not at this stage anymore. We're not at the stage anymore where everything is black and white, right? Today we have color. But it's not only color that has changed on the pictures, it's also the way that we are interacting with the world around us. We're using digital solutions everywhere. Be it in shopping, be it in other industries, we simply expect to be connected all the time and have this as part of our user experience. But the thing is, these things have changed for us, but there has also been something changing in the back end, because to make this overall transition happen, to actually get to the stage where we are today, we had to actually develop and build different systems, be this simple inventory management tools to get an overview of what we actually have in store, be it the contact points and the customer interactions that we started to collect to build an understanding for what our customers actually want, what our customers need, how our customers shop. We developed online touch points with our customers. So literally every retailer today has also an online presence. It's not only the in-store presence anymore. And also we have tried to optimize everything in marketing. We tried to optimize our ROI for our budget. So how much do we actually get out? And this actually has led to questions that have been maybe typical for an owner-led store, but became very difficult and complex to answer through the overall development that we have seen over the last 60 to 70 years to where we are today. So questions where we simply ask overarching questions over all the systems that we have within our corporations have become more and more difficult to ask. And specifically today, where our customers expect this omni-channel experience, to expect to be treated the same wherever they are, and however they interact with our businesses, this is something that we need to address. So the question really is, how do we actually create a single view on some of the business entities that we're dealing with on a regular basis to actually generate value out of the data that we're collecting within our organizations. So why do we need a single view? I do hope that, like, by giving us this short introduction with something that we actually can grasp all together, something that we experience in our everyday lives, this has stressed the why aspect. But the question now is, how do we actually do this? How do we actually connect different data sources? How do we aggregate the information together, specifically in a world where we are trying to develop faster and faster, where our applications are developing faster on a continuous basis, and also our architectures on the development side have changed tremendously to how we actually did software 30 years ago. And this is exactly where an idea like a single view comes into play. So the what part. So what do we do? What we do is we build real-time representations of the business units that we're working with the business entities and domains, to allow our developers to be faster, to be more efficient, and to actually generate the value from the data. And we'll see in 2 slides how much value we can actually generate out of this like breaking of data silos. First, before I dig into some of the values that we saw that customers of ours can generate with such approaches and such ways of working with data, I first wanted to make a little outlook, because now the example that I gave you was specifically focused on retail, was specifically focused on shopping, on the shopping part. But this is something that we see throughout different industries. So in finance, where throughout acquisitions, we saw a consolidation of the market, where single insurance companies have been buying more and more market share by the acquisition of smaller companies, thus having to integrate different disparate systems, and had exactly the same situation where they actually needed to get this overview. With retail, where we saw the different systems emerge throughout the last years, and through the digital transformation of the industry itself, till healthcare, where we can actually leverage more and more information by getting deeper insights and a better understanding of our patients. But how big are actually these impacts? And we just heard it in the conversation before in the talk. That was also one of the questions, where the question was, okay, how do we actually convince people that we can actually generate value from data, even though we're not using artificial intelligence? And believe me one thing, I have a background in data science. I love using algorithms more than anything else, and it's the most fun part ever. But there was one point that was extremely important that was also stressed in the talk before. Data is only valuable if it's clean, if we can use it in a certain way. And a lot of the time of resources today, when it comes to modeling, is actually being used for cleansing the data to get the high quality data that you and your teams are actually providing to them. And just by getting this clear data, this easy accessibility to the information, these are the results. We just heard it was bigger than 100 million. We saw customers of ours that were able to reduce their overall TCO for the systems by over 70%, because they were able to actually consolidate their systems by not being forced to actually upscale legacy data producers. We have seen op risk reductions because we had better transparency into what is actually going on in their businesses, and also obviously things like faster access to data and developer productivity, because we are building up layers of information that can be accessed. So let me just make a general goal state for short, like a general architecture of how something like this can actually look like. And then let me drill through, and I think this is the more important part, some of the requirements on the technical side, as well as on the management and organizational side, how something like this can actually be achieved. So in general, when we're talking about something like a single view, we're actually talking about a solution that allows us to consolidate different consumer systems into a layer that can be used specifically for operational purposes. This way, we actually extract information from the consumers that are actually only the information, this is an important part also of the conversations we had before, that is actually needed for the consumer systems. Because we really want to make sure that we're not investing too much money in areas where information is not needed and not valuable to the business overall. So this was also just a part of the conversation where the question is, how do we actually assess how costly some data is? And once we actually realize that data is not for free, that we also have to pay with respect to FTEs that are actually harvesting the data, making the data accessible. This is something that needs to be taken into consideration. So this is the goal state. Let's look at how we can actually achieve such a goal state in general. First of all, I wanted to stress again the two roadblocks that we see mainly in such projects. First is technological limitations. So obviously we need to be capable on the technology side to provide such a system, to actually build such a single view of data. And second of all, it's about governance. It was like a statement that governance sometimes is a word that is misused. I hope that it's okay the way that I will be using it here. And it's about processes and the management in general, how we can actually build up and go through such a process. And here we've taken a 10-step methodology. Technical complexity, I just named it on the slide, is one of the big challenges, because there is this underlying data structure that is given by all of the data producers natively, because simply those systems have their own data requirements. Those systems need to provide the information to their native original use case. But at the end of the day, all these different systems need to be reflected within the layer that can then be used to build new applications and to actually gain all the benefits that we've been just naming on the slide prior, and to achieve the added value that we've been seeing on the slides before. So what are just the three of the basic technical requirements to actually make something like this happen, and make something like this happen fast? First of all, it's having a lot of flexibility, because these systems, like both the consumer systems as well as the producer systems that we've been seeing on the slide of the goal state, on the right hand side and the left hand side, they are evolving over time. So we need to make sure that we can continuously integrate information from these systems to make sure that we do not need to go back to the original source, and can still develop new features in the applications that we are having customer facing. Second, it's scalability. One big factor is that with a single view, we will be connecting a lot of different consumer systems, and those consumer systems obviously will grow over time, because usually those are the new systems that we're building, the new applications that we're using to actually satisfy some of the digital needs of our customers. And the last one is rich accessibility, because just having the data in one place is not everything. If we have the data but cannot use it in a way that we can actually satisfy the requirements of different applications, we are ending up with a data swamp. So we bring everything in one place, we maybe have it, but we can't access it. So these are three of the key criteria that we've been seeing in the past to make such a project successful, and also add value to the organization overall. The second part that I promised was an overview on the 10-step methodology that we see and that we use with our customers to actually implement such projects and help them to organize themselves. And due to the lack of time, I really just want to focus on the three top areas that I've highlighted on the right, because it's really three stages that we need to undergo to understand the project, to develop the project, and to deploy the project in production and maintain it. So the first part, the discover part, is really about defining the scope for the project. And now there are all these nice buzzwords. I've been in consulting as well, so I tried my best to actually use some of the skills that I built back then, because it's really about being realistic, having the proper KPIs, making things measurable, and scope it out such that we have an understanding what is realistic within the given time frame that we've set for the project. And then is a really important part, which also comes into play with respect to evaluating the cost of information, because we really want to know what data do we actually need. So what is the data that is used by the customers, by the consumers of the information? So we need to go through, look at all the potential consuming systems, talk with the POs, and understand what data do you need to satisfy your needs, what are the requirements that you're actually seeing for the data, and then help them to actually go back to the data producers, scope out which information we want to collect, how to collect it. And this would also be the step where we really need to evaluate whether the cost of actually getting the additional information is worth it for the additional value that it can bring later on down the journey. The second part is the development phase. And here we actually see that this development is nothing that is linear, specifically when it comes to the benefits that, some of our customers actually get from such single view projects, from such single view implementations, because there are different maturity levels. Things start with being read-centric. So we want to make sure that all the information is accessible from the single place of truth, where we are actually starting to work with the information more intensively. And then over time, we are starting to build this up even stronger to actually make it independent from the old legacy systems that were a bottleneck for the development of applications, and that also have limited our ability to deliver value to our customers with the speed and with the capabilities that we were actually looking for. And last, it's about the deployment phase. That's perfect. It's technology. Somebody always has to screw it up. In this case, it's yet again me. I did it already in our preparation call. Now it's the clicker, so I do heavily apologize for that. The last stage is definitely is then to really get our hands dirty. We just had it in the hashtag, which is like, it's really about doing things. It's really about getting actionable. This is where we do this. So here it's really about choosing the right infrastructure for the solution that we have chosen, setting it up. Then it's about modifying the consumer systems to actually consume this newly generated single view, to actually be more dynamic and get all the value out of the new layer. And then last but not least, it's a maintenance process. So data is never a steady state. We'll always have the situation that our data landscape is changing. So just doing this once doesn't mean that this is the end. This is really just the beginning. So when you are at the stage that you have really started to break down your data silos, and you really started to make use of your information, we are getting into a maintenance process where we're repeating these phases over and over again to make sure that we can always deliver the value to our customers that we are seeking for. And this is how we achieve the goal set. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Julian, again. Are there any questions already online for Julian? 5 minutes time to have questions. If there's no online question, then I'll have one. Julian, you talked about democratization of data in terms of, it rang a tone with me when you also talked about this rich query support, which I understand is one of the, let's say, symptoms of democratization, so that the single view that you talked about will be easy to access also for a, let's say, non-scientific, non-technical user.
Exactly.
And now the question is, is that one of the value propositions actually that you give to people in your business development, that you say this is what you get, and this is how you can assess the value of this democratization? How is it playing out?
I think that's a really important question. Like, the reason why I was bringing this up was really when we are looking at the promises of Hadoop, for example. When we started with Hadoop and when we started to build data lakes, we had this idea that we can now put all the data in one place. We can gather huge amounts of information. But the problem that a lot of people had was, have you ever tried, just a personal question, have you ever tried to get data out of Hadoop using MapReduce or something similar? It's pretty painful. MapReduce jobs require their own architecture. Like, there's a lack of skill to actually build such things. So also here, for example, a lot of topics that we currently discuss with customers is really like building an additional layer of meta information on the data within Hadoop to actually allow them query the meta information to then pinpoint on the data that is stored in Hadoop to actually gain value out of this information. And we are talking about projects where they are 2 years down the line and have invested huge amounts of money to actually build up the data lakes. So from my point of view, even when we're talking about analytical data, there are sometimes we're saying like, oh yeah, latency is not so much of a matter. If the query runs longer, that's one thing. But once we're getting to petabyte scale of data, and we are trying to query petabytes of information, and we need to go through all the information, kind of a row level scan, where we really need to look through every file and understand what is going on. I really feel that this is really the point where this point has been understated. So my question would really be, can we afford to not have this kind of capabilities? rather than just thinking about, is this one of the value propositions that one should make? I really think this is a prerequisite for working with data vision.
Okay, so in my words, saying that making data accessible, again, not only for let's say architecturally knowledgeable people.
Yes.
This is where the actual value lies in creating a single view like that and having rich query support.
It has to be easy for all parts of the organization. Whether I would just want to get a short overview, building my own BI dashboard with a couple of clicks, I think this should be something that just goes native with the data. If it's that I want to make a query, but I don't want to write it myself, I need some tools to be able to click through things, to build queries via drag and drop with low code and export it, such that other people can work with them.
Just out of curiosity, because we talked about the ROI case and the business case, is that something that you can actually quantify in an ROI case, so that your clients can then argue the investment better against the top management?
Case by case, isn't it?
I would say it always depends. I mean, I'm a solutions architect. My favorite answer is it always depends. Let's look at what is actually happening, because the thing is, for example, if I can't access the data, but it's non-business critical, then it's always difficult to make this argument. If it comes to the situation where we are looking at data and we can gain 100 million euros, or where we can actually see incidents that have not been quantifiable before, because it simply took me 24 hours to get access to my information, and by the moment that the next batch job is actually available in my data warehouse, I realize, oh, now actually the situation cannot be logged anymore, thus my damage cannot be claimed anymore. Situations like these obviously then have a direct business pain. And I think here it's really two ways: the way that we discussed, going from the cost perspective, but also the way of looking at how much value can I actually contribute to my business by making this information accessible, break this down on the single attribute level, or simply have an overall business case for the overall project and then executing based on that.
And how do you calculate avoiding risks? This was a really big question for us 2 years ago. How to put a value on this? Avoiding a risk is a value, but how much euro is it?
Absolutely. This really depends. For example, if I'm looking at it from a financial services perspective, like this is my old role, where I really have to provide capital for all the risks that I have on my book. In this very moment, I have a cost of capital that I actually need to provide as a CET1, for example, to actually cover certain business points that I do. In this case, it's easy. Obviously, in another situation, risk has the big problem that risk, per definition, defines a potential business threat that does not yet materialize. So there we would really need to think about, okay, how high is the likelihood of something happening? Looking at the event, what is the cost of the event, and then typical probability theory.
Very important discussion, very important question.
But it's not actually. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian, and we'll have a chance to actually explore on this a little bit later in the panel discussion. Now I'm handing over to Marc Roberts, who is joining us online. Hello, Marc. Can you hear us?
Hello. Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Excellent. We can hear you very well here in Stuttgart, and now I can see you even. Marc, welcome. And I'm over right to you. I think Stefan is operating the presentation, so the floor is yours.
Lovely. Thank you. And good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk really about a little bit of the path and journey we've taken working with Bosch around data management, and developing some of the solutions and approaches really to data, particularly in the mobility sphere itself. But then I want to talk about how things have been evolving over the last few months, really, into sort of a new form around data exchange. And I saw that someone, I think, just asked a question around data marketplaces actually on the forum. So this presentation may answer some of that. But I also want to give an example really of data in the mobility sphere. And I think from what we've just heard in the last two presentations, it will touch on a lot of the real world, should we say, from a mobility perspective, a transport perspective, the topics that have just been discussed by Stefan and Julian as well. So Stefan, next slide, please. So ourselves and Bosch have been working on a number of projects going back a couple of years. The City Data Analytics project looked to take real-time mobility data that we could find in, we focused on an area of London as a proxy, to help us understand the quantity and flow of movement of traffic data, traffic on the roads, and how that data helps us to understand and analyze the different sort of modes that might be going on. Because if we wanted to introduce a new mode, we would need to be able to analyze what the scope would be and how many people might transfer from one mode to another. And in doing that data projects, we eventually pulled in about 8 sets of real-time data, but analysed about another 70 other forms of static data to help us understand the potential movement. And it highlighted that there was quite substantial potential for people to move away from cars, but a lot of additional work needed to go around that, particularly in terms of physical infrastructure around roads. So the system is not one of simply encouraging people to shift mode, but it needs a more holistic approach potentially to do that. Latterly, we've been working with Bosch through the London Connectory to have this data exchange ecosystem, the Connectory ecosystem exchange of data, particularly around mobility, so CDM, which was looking to ingest and share data between the Connectory businesses, so between businesses in Bosch, but also the SMEs predominantly within the businesses themselves. And that extends, or does extend, to London, Chicago, Stuttgart and Guadalajara. And the aim was to publish data through the data exchange or data marketplace, as someone has pointed out, and to allow people to try and access that data so that we could find potential value in merging two sort of companies together in what they're doing. So creating a data sharing ecosystem within the exchange environment and the Bosch divisions that go with that. However, the solution we've got in terms of the data marketplace has been evolving through a project that Bosch has also been involved in the UK called Convex, the Connected Vehicle Exchange. Next slide, please. Convex, the Connected Vehicle Exchange, although the title refers purely to vehicles, it's really trying to be something quite more than that around the mobility sphere as well, and to look at what it can do to help achieve government objectives around data. And government objectives around the UK, but I know from my work in the mobility sphere, these are generally very common around the world, is to be safer, cleaner and better. So how can data help mobility and the mobility businesses provide safer travel? That's very obvious through the work that's happening around connected and autonomous vehicles, for example, at the moment. How can it be cleaner? So air quality is obviously a very high topic at the moment in the environment and environmental sustainability. So how can we manage traffic around the road networks in terms of minimizing air quality or pollution rather, sorry, and the pollution effects that go with that. And to date, as I'll come on to a little bit later, but the management of the road network is pretty much done in total isolation of anything around the environment at any time of year. And better, so really touching, I think, on some of the comments that have gone before around performance being improved. So how can we manage more and more people around different road networks in a more sustainable way, in a way that maximizes the capacity of the network and maximizes that travel. And obviously there was a very strong shift towards public transport until roughly about March this year, when the current pandemic obviously had a big impact on that, and is continuing to obviously have a big impact on mobility and the modal types of mobility. Next slide, please, Stefan. So the environment in which Convex has come into play has two really axes that are going on. So the capabilities of systems are evolving, as I'm sure they do in many networks, not just mobility, and the integration in the network is increasing all the time. So we are seeing the equipment that is being used, the tools, the methodology, the products, the systems, the solutions are continuing to evolve to meet some of these new challenges, and authorities are having to adapt even the way that they manage the road network, moving quite often away from purely tactical to more holistic strategic view of what's going on their network. Vehicles themselves, as already mentioned, are becoming much more intelligent in what they can do themselves, and also more demanding of the information they would like to know about their journey in real time. A lot of that currently provided through satellite navigation companies, but there's no reason why it cannot be provided by the authorities themselves. And obviously vehicle to infrastructure technologies, the cooperative technologies, is a growing system, a growing technology at the moment, a growing service that many countries are looking to deploy. Sensors themselves are becoming far more intelligent. So in the road sphere at the moment, most systems are completely reliant on inductive loop buried underneath the road, or something above the road that's doing the same job. But sensors are starting to come out now that are much more intelligent and using particularly machine learning, but AI as well, to understand what they are looking at and what they're detecting to give a far more informed picture of what's happening on the networks. And of course, as those systems get deployed, the data that goes with it starts to grow exponentially. And with that increasing integration and data sharing that can go on, then obviously new applications and services can come along and help provide more efficient, more intelligent ways of managing networks. So Convex is trying to look at using dynamic data, so real-time data, to facilitate the innovation and the evolving technology that's already there on networks. And in particular, trying to be a long-term partner to players as well. Don't want to just sort of share data for a one-off situation. It's looking really to be real-time embedded type system to help the data sharing that goes on. Next slide, please, Stefan. So how does it do that? As someone mentioned, the marketplace. So two sides of it really. For data providers, we're looking to pull in data onto the platform itself, so that it can be put up on a catalogue in a similar way I'm sure that Stefan was talking about earlier. But it's very key to help providers put up the right information, and I think this was mentioned earlier as well, getting the right descriptions to data and the right metadata to go with it is very important, so that when somebody comes to consume it, it's very easy to find the right information they're looking for. As a service provider, we don't own the data provider still owns the data, and they can put their own licensing terms against that, and the Convex tool can help manage that for them. And if there's financial value attached to that data, then we can manage the monetary side of exchanging the data as well. So very important point, and I think as Stefan was talking about, it's important to get that catalogue going to actually see what there is, and the image there is just showing a listing type catalogue of the data that goes with it. As a service provider, from Convex point of view, we help them manage that catalogue, manage the data that's going through as well. Next slide, please, Stefan. So from a consumer point of view, with the right data and metadata there, then obviously they can search and find that information. Data itself can be shared either selectively with clients or can be openly published so that people can just come and find that data. And as a service provider, we help providers look to develop the APIs, so they can do that themselves through the tool that's here, or we can help develop that for them, so that it's easy to access data and consume the data that's there. And the image here is another way of looking for and searching for data on the platform itself from a more geographic point of view. So we can create these geographic scenes whereby you can home in to find out what data is actually available in a geographic area. This is being used for a cooperative autonomous vehicle test route. So the vehicle itself can collect its own data of what it's doing, but it has no idea of what the infrastructure around it is trying to do. But by doing this, they can then ask for the data from that infrastructure items, and that can be collated and provided to the OEM who may be testing a vehicle, for example. Next slide, please, Stefan. On top of the just provision of a service, we also look to provide a number of things around that that help with managing the data. And as already been mentioned before, data quality is a very important thing. So in terms of that data processing, we help transform data where necessary, because there's data and data and data, which can come in all different forms and sizes and shapes. even if it's from systems providing data about a similar thing. For example, the weather. Different manufacturers of equipment can provide data in different forms, so it needs to potentially be not just collated, but aggregated or even harmonized, and we can provide a transformation service to help do that. In that way, you can put data in a format that is much more usable by a consumer. And indeed, there are consumers who might take data, do their own processing it and transform it and place it back on a marketplace for someone else to use in a more holistic way. The private data hub is simply that it can be provided as a white label service as well, so it can be used purely within a closed environment for data sharing if you don't want it public sort of access or wider access. And then, of course, as one of the key things that we do, and it's quite important, which we'll come on to in a minute, is it's very neutral. So we generally do not, and we try and avoid, as a company as Cordant, provide any kind of analytics or visualization of the data on top or even use of the data. But try and maintain that very neutral position. So by doing so, there are a number of companies that start to use the data, and that creates an environment, a sort of an ecosystem really of companies using data in the mobility sphere. So if we're talking to new clients, then it's potentially possible to go to them and say, well, if you're looking for the analytics around the data that's there or the visualization, then we can recommend companies. Next slide, please. This is quite a complicated slide, but I think it fits in very nicely with the conversations that have gone before to talk about the data flows around the transport community. And Julian had a slide up there about the data that was showing the complexity of it. And this is a simplified view, or as simplified view as I can make it really, of the data and technical systems in the mobility environment. But it's important to understand this as the environment is rapidly changing at the moment through the use of connected autonomous vehicles creating their own data and wanting data off networks. But as new service provision goes in, then there is a greater and growing need to share data between network providers, or network operators shown on the right of this diagram, and service providers shown on the left of this diagram. Julian talked about siloed systems. So in a traditional world of managing the road network, the physical layer and network layer on the right, those systems would be very siloed. They'd have their own systems out on the road, the edge devices, and they would pull in data from that to a central system whereby they might be managed. So things like urban traffic control or variable message signs or parking systems, for example. And it's not just one little system. There could be multiple sources of data for them and multiple endpoints to go with it, but historically very siloed. What is new in this environment is the application layer on the right-hand side for network operators. Although this sort of level of dynamic control and incident management would exist for strategic networks such as the motorways or large cities like London in the UK, most authorities do not have that level of control or implementation at the moment, and it's becoming increasingly important that they do, because we want to manage networks in real time and dynamically in response to things like air quality. It also means that because of congestion, we need to share information with neighbouring authorities, so we start to need that data integration at that level. And you can see then that the value of a neutral data sort of marketplace or data exchange becomes key, because you don't want to start to come up against the commercialities of one company who may be providing one or more of the systems to start to control that data and put other companies potentially at fear of it. So it's a lot easier to sit as a neutral hub where you can identify that data to be shared. And as Stefan was saying, not all data necessarily does need sharing. You need to do the analysis to work out what's of value and what might be of use. And value, of course, can be in terms of it helping just the process to work, helping people to evolve a system, or if you can find it in terms of the financial value as well that go with it. On the left-hand side, the service provider element is growing. There's generally been very little integration between the left-hand and the right-hand side in the marketplace. But with the advent of mobility as a service and mobility hubs, there is, and floating data as well, of course, there's increasing ability to share data with network operators to understand in real time information of what's happening on the network that they currently can't detect with the limitations of the detection systems that exist. Coupled with that, there's data that can be got from anybody using a vehicle around the network as well. And I'll just touch on a couple of those sort of things. So, but first of all, Julian talked about technology limitations and technical complexity. The limitations here generally tend to lie around basically company firewalls if you want to try and access information, or people wanting for commercial reasons not to share information. So quite often legislation is being put in place where network operators need information to help them understand the network that's going on, and therefore being able to analyze really the data that sits across this whole ecosystem to say what is actually of value and what shouldn't we share, and what might be in breach of things like GDPR. Then obviously it becomes a key aspect in terms of looking at how the data sharing ecosystem and the data platform can develop. Next slide, please, Stefan. So just looking at a couple of examples here, really, to illustrate some of that. Top left, we've got the micromobility, and I would include in that even delivery bikes as well. So the very relevant at the moment, authorities would love to know what it is, the mix of modal share. So how many people are shifting from one mode to another mode? And there are some ways of collecting that data. It can be done via apps, for example, but they even before COVID were looking to collect data from micromobility because they wanted to identify who might be using it to help with the decision making of managing and planning a network. If there's a greater use of micromobility, then the network operator may actually want, as has happened certainly in London, to actually start to close down lanes to allow cycling, greater use of cycling and walking. So it's not just about getting the data to know what's happening, but it's also getting the data to inform the decision making. On the left there, bottom left, the lorries, the trucks, the freight. Although freight operators have a very slick, a very refined service and understand their own data, as roads become more and more congested, the network operator may need to prioritize certain vehicles over others, and freight being one of them. So their regional authorities, certainly in the UK, are saying, well, we really want to have a better understanding of freight movements in the in and across our region, so that we can help plan and manage and implement the technology on the right hand side of the diagram to help that to flow. And particularly because it will continue to increase because population growth is having a consistently pressure onto this sort of network. The bottom picture is changing consumer habits. So as has happened over the pandemic period, there are a lot of people moving to online shopping. That was a big trend before COVID-19 hit, but obviously it has escalated rapidly in the last few months as a consequence. In terms of managing a network, that has meant that the one key growth area of vehicles, the highest growth area of vehicles on the network, has come from small delivery vans running around areas. So how are authorities responding? They're thinking, well, we need to do things like micro consolidation. How do we work across a number of commercial operators to bring their goods to a single point, so we have one van doing the deliveries rather than multiple vans doing the deliveries to a particular area? Middle right, the control room image is showing that as that application layer starts to develop, there is a need for new solutions to help the authorities manage their networks. And although those sort of solutions exist, as I say, at the strategic level, most local authorities don't have the funding for that. So we need to look for finding solutions that help achieve the end result, but in a more efficient way. And often you can only do that by exposing some of the data to allow that innovation to happen. And then the top picture, top right, is connected cars. So as cars become data gatherers themselves, providing that information into the systems that manage networks real time becomes very key, because you have a much richer picture of who's using the network and why they're using the network. And therefore you can provide increasing levels of congestion control, which means that the capacity of the network can also go up. Next slide, please. So just putting that into conclusion, and concluding really, just put it into a final picture. So from a mobility sphere, and it's not restricted purely to mobility. So in terms of that image I've shown, the data exchange between a number of different companies providing network systems to operators of networks could and does map across from mobility to other sectors such as energy, for example. But the basic principles are all the same. You have a number of actors delivering the services, and we're only really touching on the things here, but the key ones around the network operators, around service providers, around customers at the end who are actually using the service, and on the right hand side allowing third parties to access data to allow that innovation to happen, is facilitated really by a data exchange sitting in the middle. And as I say, providers can control who they share data with, but in looking and analysing that system that we've just shown in the last two slides, you start to work out what are the real use cases and who needs to share the data. So the bottom here is kind of a range of potential use cases in sort of a generic form that are being used for data, not just in the control of the networks, but in implementing strategies. As I say, governments may want to control air quality in a much more dynamic way, so you need to have the systems and the abilities to do that. You need to meet regulations because they're increasing all the time. So micromobility has a mobility data standard that's very recently come out of America, and people want that implemented because it regulates and controls the sharing of the data, makes the data easily understood and easily replicated because everybody's using a similar standard. Often not the case in my experience. But also things like cybersecurity are very important and becoming increasingly important in managing things like the transport networks. It is a critical business asset. I think that was ably demonstrated in previous two conversations, when particularly presentations you're looking at those use cases. But even in this more open environment, then managing a network is an interesting thing, because it's one of those things that tends to happen. And quite rarely do you actually see the system collapse and networks come to a grinding halt, as we'd say. In my experience, has only happened twice in about the last 10 years in the UK. And that doesn't mean that when systems get to a saturated point, they come stuck. But in terms of where the actual technology itself has actually had a problem, then one example I've had is in a major UK city that occurred, and it took people an additional 2 hours to get home that night. So that's the effect of the systems that are kind of running in the background. And then obviously, as a trading marketplace, as we've really been talking about, is opening up data so that it can be it can be analysed by more people, it can be played with in terms of innovation, and it just helps that collaboration to achieve some of these goals, or these increasing integration goals that have been demonstrated by those slides I've been talking about. And next slide, Stefan. I think that's me. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, for this deep dive into essentially a data marketplace. My understanding, Convex.
Yep.
I think we're going to have a very, very, very short rearrangement here, so we can dive directly into the panel discussion. With seats being set up, and I'm asking Julian and Stefan back here on the floor. Hello, everyone. And we'll go right into the discussion. Yes, please. Welcome back.
That's the good thing.
That's the discussion. And Mark, actually, the first question goes directly to you, and on your interesting talk. Convex, again, my understanding is what you presented is let's say a marketplace for traffic network data, with a bunch of data providers, as you mentioned, from any kind of edge devices to potential data consumers. My question is back into the context of our talk tonight. The value of data. How do you have a business model already for this? And in terms of, are you paying data providers for providing data? are consumers paying for consuming the data?
Ultimately, that would be the intent. Convex actually goes live at the very end of this month or during October, and has been developed in that context of sharing the data for mobility. Now, ultimately, there would be a payer of the system. Now, either they're paying to put the data sharing in place, so collecting data from a provider and giving it to a consumer, or a provider has value in their data that a consumer would then pay for. So we, as Convex, wouldn't pay the provider. That would be paid as and when a consumer used the data and the level of data they might use. So yes, but Convex has been done for sharing mobility data, and that's its origins and its focus at the moment. But the underlying tool itself could actually be working in other sectors, and we're already discussing an energy-related situation that would do much the same thing.
Okay, so but my understanding is then there's no. I mean, what would be the holy grail of data? Is to say, okay, I give you this piece of data, and I create this, or I have this set of data, and I create this part of valuable information out of that, and then you have to pay £2 for this.
Yes, in simple terms, but I think I'd add to it, what we are doing is trying to work with clients and data providers and even consumers to understand the data needs in more detail. So a little bit of that sort of analysis that I think Stefan was talking about at the beginning, and looking at, in a sense, that picture I was drawing, but saying what are the use cases that need to come from that. And that's one of the outputs from Convex, is to look at the marketplace, say what are the existing use cases, what are the potentially new use cases that are coming through, so that if you are looking at an end user, whether that's a government authority or a commercial business, you know, what data would they need, why would they need it, what value is it going to be to them, and therefore trying to align up ultimately the providers with consumers. That would be the ultimate aim and intent of doing the work with Convex. So as I think one of your colleagues who might even be on the call actually says, the sort of matchmaking side, the linking providers to consumers for a reason, but we need to go through that development of the use cases to work out what that reason might actually be. Now, some of the reasons, sorry, just to add to that, some of the reasons are there because it's the existing system. The network needs to manage. There's an authority at the end of it who needs to control a network, and to do that there are certain things they need in terms of data to operate the systems that they've got, or to operate the systems that they will need to have in the future because of changing parameters, real-time parameters to manage that network, whether it's types of vehicle prioritization or air quality, for example.
The topic about use case identification is actually a question that I wanted to ask you, Julian, and also later you, Stefan, because you also mentioned in your let's say your approach, how to, let's say, approach a data initiative. As one of the first steps, obviously, to identify the right kind of use cases. And Stefan, you talked about your cost saving example, where clearly you picked a use case, obviously, that was intuitively relatively valuable because you had a lot of scale, as you mentioned, a lot of articles, a lot of master data of those articles in a lot of shops. What can you say about use case identification and picking the right use cases that also then, let's say, convince management about the value of all the data in a way that Stefan was able to do? Maybe first to you, and so what's the right approach? What parameters do you look at in terms of identifying use case?
It's actually a pretty interesting question, because the problem is to actually be able to identify the use case, you actually need to step one step further and actually know what potential use cases I have to actually pick from. So I think this is really one of the major tasks that within an organization there's oftentimes no transparency about what issues actually occur on a more global level and how those different initiatives could profit from such an approach. So this is something that we sometimes encounter, and this is also something that I know from my times in consulting, that it's really important to also help organizations to understand like what is actually happening within also the broader scale, because obviously data, like such projects, they are larger scale projects, so it's not something that can only be funded by a single organization. So I really think having an understanding for different initiatives comes first, then really building a list, like a backlog of different projects. That can also be something that can be obviously done from an external perspective, where you really help to evaluate which initiatives could be done, and also the complexity of these initiatives, the potential impact that can be done with a very high-level analysis, and then really just sort these use cases and see, obviously in our case, with respect to what we presented, within a specific domain, because obviously something like this in a domain-oriented perspective can get the largest value or the largest impact, and then really just see with which ones you want to start, and maybe also define like some sort of threshold where obviously the benefit is not higher than the costs associated with the approach. Yeah, so I think this would be one of the most important parts, to really understand
so
where we can pick the easiest like fruit from the tree, so the lowest hanging fruit first.
Okay, but a relatively rigorous assessment in terms of those different criteria, which I completely support.
Of course. Yeah, I just wanted to say I would love to also ask a question in the direction of the marketplace, if that's okay.
Sure.
Because one thing that I was just thinking about really is also determining the pricing of data assets. Because I was just like looking back into my head, and I was remembering that when you have like low marginal utility costs, so if I can produce an additional asset of an element at rather infinite scale, what I can do is I don't have to set the price point at the demand of a good, but I can pretty much choose that freely. So how are you currently planning to actually price data on your marketplace if you technically have some sort of a monopoly, rather than a free, efficient market where people can trade goods with a standardized criteria?
That's a very good question. At the moment in the mobility sphere, there's very little pricing of data. It is done predominantly by the mobile phone companies, and those who are using floating data. They've obviously put a value to their data and charge for it at the moment. In terms of ourselves, then we would work with a provider and consumers to understand the quantity of data they're going to use and the frequency of the data they're going to use it. And we, based on those two figures, we then try and work out really what the value might be. A provider might, of course, turn up and say, well, this is the price it is, and take it or leave it. By being neutral, then if, like you say, you don't want to create a monopoly position, so as I say, we as Convex wouldn't set the price. Generally, would only work with providers and consumers to help them understand what might be the value in the data a provider is given, or what it might be to a consumer to help advise providers. We generally ourselves wouldn't set it. We would only be part of this sort of ecosystem deciding it. But by being neutral, of course, if a provider is providing data that is too expensive for somebody, and we already see that, because local authorities generally will not take data from mobile phone companies in any great quantity because they can't afford it. So the neutrality means that it's an opportunity for someone else, a different provider, to come in with either a competing service and provide that, or to try and offer something different that allows the consumers still to achieve the end result they want. I know it's a little bit of a not answering the question, because we're not sitting there with at the moment an Excel spreadsheet saying this is data in, this is data out. It will only be derived by understanding the quantity of data and the frequency of data that's going to be used.
I just a thought on it, because in some other countries you have their legal definition that you have to share some data, and that's a perspective I think we should have in our mind, that sharing the data without any price could have an indirect value as well in terms of open data, and some use cases on the basis of this open data which generate in an indirect way and a value as a return, let's say, on the other hand. So this for instance, in Switzerland with the SBB, it's really impressive what they can generate with just an open data strategy in terms of sharing itself.
There's a question actually I wanted to ask you, Stefan, about sharing data, because you mentioned it in your talk that obviously, let's say your internal perspective, so Schwarz Gruppe internal perspective is one, but then you also have this vision of creating extended value from sharing.
Yeah.
So what do you envision there? Something like putting data on a retail marketplace similar to Convex, or what's your vision there?
I mean, let's say having a discount background from Lidl, I mean, sharing information is not our core business. Let's say going 20 years back. But as you can see, times are changing, and you can see the whole supply chain, for instance, for all the Lidl products on the homepage in the meanwhile. So of course the mindset is changing there, which information has to be shared because of, I don't know, GDPR, NMIV, and all those kind of regulations which define which information and which data we have to share or which we are not allowed to share. So that's a background, of course, we have to focus on, and on a strategic level, of course, we have to think about how to generate value out of this. For instance, so if you go to Facebook and have a little conversation with a chatbot at Lidl, you will find out that this kind of technical person has a lot of information and shares a lot of information on the other hand. So of course, we are working on this, and times are changing, and mindset, of course, is changing.
There's actually in the online forum, there's a couple of questions also to you,
Sure.
A little bit related to what you just said. One question is because you showed this again about the valuation approach. You showed the approach with the cost-based approach, and the question is here: doesn't the cost-based approach rather give a lower bound on the data value? So does it actually underestimate the real value of the data that you have or that you cleaned and process?
From my personal experience during the last years, there's a potential risk for a yes as the answer to this question. That's why, let's say, we took into consideration not just only the straightforward cost-based approach, but combined this with some data quality aspects, and combined this and with a list of questions in a simple questionnaire, which the user or the data asset owner, let's say, has to answer. So the approach originally, or actually, is a cost-based one, but has some aspects which deal with this potential risk, let's say, to underestimate the value. And this is exactly what I meant. We had a big discussion how to write this euro value to some risk-based savings the processes, because if there's a potential risk of let's say having some fee of, I don't know, 20 million you have to pay because you did something wrong with data, and if you can avoid it to 100%, what's the value of this?
Yeah.
The 20 million you saved as a risk, or just the 2 million because you have to calculate 10%? It's a quite a good question for us, at least. In financial sector, it could be more easy. But
I actually just wanted to say this sounds a little bit like insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you have a certain loss that you are facing, you have a certain probability you can attach to it, and then you can actually bundle like a certain portfolio of risks, and then you can maybe look at whether these risks are related and then hedge against some of these.
And this is exactly what it's about. But the thing is, let's say, if you have to gain trust in this value, let's say it's you for us in our world, you don't have to try to explain this algorithm what's behind. Because then you get, yeah, that's clear. Then I understand this 100 million euro right now because I don't know, you tuned the algorithm. That's the value. It means.
But so does it now in your calculations and in your ROI cases? Are you using a, let's say, prevented damage, expected value of prevented damages as part of the justification for doing another data use case?
In some way, yes, but in a very transparent and defined way. The owner, let's say, defines how much or how less risk you want to calculate.
So the business side has to.
In the cost saving approach, means the process improvement approach. This is per definition a very defensive one. Because if you gain the value of the 100 million I wrote to the slide, and this is the most defensive way how to calculate it. It's clear that
there's actually one follow-up question about this, also to you, Stefan. And the question goes, are you using data also to monetize externally or only for internal cost savings? My interpretation would be monetizing externally would be two ways, either to create top-line growth.
For the moment, as far as I know, we do not sell any data, if this is the question.
This will be the second part.
At least not in my, let's say, in my teams, we do not sell data for the moment. How the future would look like, we will see, and nobody can answer this. But for the moment, we are not monetizing data and selling them.
Mm-hmm. But my question then would be, my follow-on question would be, again, the one case that you showed is clearly a process efficiency, is a cost saving, but do you also have, are you working on use cases, or are you implementing business cases where top-line growth is part of the ROI? So more sales, better sales, product with higher prices, and so on.
Of course, at the end, let's say it has the objective to, I don't know, improve the whatever you name it. Of course, I mean that's clear. But coming from this data foundation level, managing master data, managing metadata, it's more or less, let's say, an unsexy discipline to calculate the value. I think this would be a question for the analytics guys and the data science guys. They are dealing with those kind of questions more than.
Okay, thank you.
If I could jump in, just thinking of value in the mobility sphere, a lot of the value is indirect. So if mobility is safer, then the value savings could be in things like the health industry. If we can monitor how people travel, then going back to the insurance question, insurance companies are very interested in providing insurance that's related to where you travel, not just purely giving you a flat fee per year. So it might relate to those who travel more would pay more insurance, and those who travel less, obviously. If you improve congestion, then journey times improve, so people gain time. And obviously most national governments tend to put a figure against time that might be saved. So we often have a case where clients might be paying an authority, for example, a government authority might be paying for a service, but they don't actually be the primary beneficiary of it. The beneficiary might be further down the chain or even in a different sphere.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Mark. Actually, I'm looking a little bit at the time, and therefore I would allow one more question. I'm actually reading a question again from the chat. I'm not so sure. I think it goes to both you and yourself and Mark again. The question is about my understanding about employing data marketplaces. So I read the question. What do you think of data marketplaces? What do you think of data marketplaces as tools, platforms for data democratization? Are they suitable for creating a single enterprise-wide overview of data?
Well, from my perspective, I have to say yes, because that's what we provide, and it allows that data exchange to happen. I don't think it's necessarily a tool or a platform. We really see it as a service. It is allowing people to exchange the data in an efficient way, in a way that can be accessed by other parties where it may be needed by the client or by consumers. If you have a very siloed system, then of course you don't really need a data marketplace. You just have the data going through. But quite often people will find that although a project may have had that single ambition and can deliver an output through a siloed system, when you start to look at the evolving transport network and the future mobility, then you start to realize there is a lot of data that would be beneficial to have open and accessed by third parties. And ideally, and we're all looking forward to try and find the data where you have financial value against it as well. So I would have to say, yes, it is beneficial.
Like, I I'm like, now I'm just thinking out loud a little bit, because I just was thinking about like a couple of these factors. I mean, specifically when it comes to something that you've been talking about, really building a data catalog, really knowing what data I actually have as an enterprise, what data I might be lagging. An interesting factor, for example, would be to just set up a cost estimation for a project that makes certain information available, and then maybe see whether the business is funding something like this. So really having a sort of a bidding platform to get access to specific information, something that I'm just thinking about. Another aspect would be really to maybe sell data internally that is also already available through a data catalog to fund additional projects that do not yet have like business demand, where we see certain potential. That would be also an approach, because at the end, like, there is always a certain cost associated to providing specific information. And when it comes to the general aspect of providing data through a marketplace and also democratizing access to things, I actually have experienced this myself as a little side project I've been doing in the past. So I just share this as a note. I myself was using an API marketplace to get access to specific information that was sold on the internet. In my case, it was financial information that I used to make analytics based upon. And it was a very easy access. It was priced from specific vendors, and I had the opportunity to choose based on whatever I wanted, based on a fixed fee. And yet again, like I said, like scaling data as an asset is something that can be done with linear cost. Might be a great business model for the people providing it. In my case, was very interesting for me as well. So here, I would say in this specific example, it is actually democratizing access, because I'm not really sure getting a Bloomberg or Reuters at home is something that, like, specifically today might not be as necessary, but 10 years ago was extremely expensive. And the only way to access specific information. So I really see this also as a tool. So little vision and realistic part.
More or less, I would agree to both, because thinking about a marketplace, we often come from the past thinking, okay, this is one place where to find the data, but this is not how it should be understandable for the future, because it's just a place as an entry point, and where the data comes from does not matter at all. The only question is, do you get it as a service? And this is more or less why we need those kind of metadata management, data catalogs, API registration platforms, and those kind of things, because you have to make the information behind the data accessible. And you need this entry point. And if it's at the end, I don't know, decentralized or centralized, it doesn't matter. If it has the sign, okay, this is high quality and you can trust on this, I don't care where it comes from.
Data as a service.
Exactly, that's what I mean, data as a service, or data methodology, data quality as a service.
Absolutely. Finishing off with a round, maybe of a little bit of a fun question. Please complete the following sentence.
These are the most dangerous questions.
It's not pre-planned.
Like literally, this has not been scripted.
No, it's not scripted.
But it's easy. It's easy enough. You can do it. Data is the new oil. Therefore,
I don't agree.
Why not? Mark, what do you say?
I will not answer the question. I did it, I think 2 years ago at the ECR day of GS1. I did a speech after Olaf Koch, and he said that is the new oil, and I said I could never imagine that I have something against to say to Olaf Koch, because oil is not a very future kind of thing. So I said data is the water. Data should treat it like water. So I'm not able to complete the sentence. Sorry.
Okay, let's do it again. Finish discussion. Yes. Data is the new water. Therefore,
we need to make it accessible to everyone.
Excellent. Mark, therefore,
we don't. I was going to link it to the oil. Is don't leave it in the tankers and in the silos. Actually, make it available and open to everybody. Let it flow.
Stefan, data is the new water. Therefore,
data has to be overall accessible, but also protected
and pure.
And pure.
And of high quality. Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everyone on the cameras in the Teams call. Thanks. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good. Session.
Cut.
Genau. Regie.